world, just rolling along, just rolling along. I'm sitting on top of the world, just rolling along.
Hello and welcome to the third episode of the Solo Dungeon Crawler Solo Roleplay podcast. In the last episode we talked about my ongoing OD&D campaign and how I used Mythic GM Emulator 2nd Edition to run a little urban adventure. My adventuring party had been trying to find out what happened to some stolen goods on behalf of the village peddler in the village of Greenford. So to kick things off with this episode, I'm going to wrap up this particular adventure. So my party, the questing knights, decided to enter the Silver Arrow Inn, seeking some peasant farmers they'd just heard about from the grocer. A question for the oracle then was, do they spot them? And the oracle said no. So they could not see any group of farmers drinking at that moment. It was probably too early in the day. They decided to speak to Olm Clericson, the innkeeper, who owes them a favour, because previously they helped rid him from a giant rat attack, and this happened in the campaign a month or so ago. So the party asked the innkeeper, what recent news in the village? And the oracle spat out, invade, go. So this was my interpretation of those two words in the context of the adventure and what was going on in this particular scene. This is going to come out as dialogue from Olm Clericson. A group of outsiders have been intimidating my customers and ruining business, Olm explained. So if you are familiar with Mythic or heard episode 2 of this podcast, then by now you should be vaguely familiar, at the very least, of how a typical oracle system works. A couple of words are selected at random and used to determine what happens in the story next. And this can often be used as a way of having a direct dialogue with an NPC, and in the following bit of narrative, that's what I did. Are they farmers by any chance? Asked Bree. Yes, and you're not the only ones asking after them. Bree Landell is the party's elf and often the spokesperson due to her high charisma score. Who else has been asking after them? A mercenary woman from the last redoubt was here just yesterday asking after those thugs. Do you know where we can find this woman? No. So at this point in the adventure, a random event occurred, dictating that I should move towards a story thread determined randomly. And the thread rolled was who had a broken vase. So in old school D&D fashion, I have random events occur when a 6-sided die is rolled on my own yes-no oracle, and here's what happened with that. While the party were talking to the innkeeper, they noticed an ornate vase in the corner of the common room. Is that a new vase? Bree asked. Yes. Why do you ask? Did you have one broken recently? I did. In a recent brawl started by those thugs. Where did you get the replacement? From a pawnbroker at the market. So the questing knights visited the pawnbroker at the local market, a young, immaculately dressed woman. The party planned on purchasing or pawning something and asking for a written receipt, so they could compare the handwriting to the replacement order. Sister Galantia, the party's cleric, decided to pawn her lantern. I suppose when it comes to the subject of buying and selling in an original Dungeons & Dragons campaign, the general rules of such matters are very much down to the way the economy of the fantasy world operates. This is a subjective thing, And dependent on the world that the referee has decided to build, a quick browse through the 3 little brown books and the AD&D core rules does not offer much guidance on the matter. In Men and Magic it says it will be necessary for players to equip their characters with various basic items of equipment. Selection of items is strictly up to the players, and gold pieces are taken away accordingly. Players may sell to one another, of course, and then gold pieces would be transferred. And this is about the extent of the discussion regarding selling. This falls short, however, when a player wants to sell something to an NPC or pawn it, and pawnbrokers were found during the Middle Ages. It falls even shorter if you're a solo player like me and you don't have the luxury of an impartial referee to handle such negotiations. But there are the Judges Guild publications to consider, which were widely popular for the early OD&D players. Prior to the publication of AD&D, Judges Guild published the D&D Ready Reference Sheets. So as a side, the Ready Reference Sheets did contain a very brief trade guide which explains that the maximum market potential for trade is roughly 4 times greater than the population, and also demand is the willingness to buy, not the willingness to purchase. And the guide goes on to provide the following categories of demand. So there's common and rare, and common yields a 1% demand a week, rare a 22% demand a week, and there is also extraordinary, which yields a 56% chance per week. So this guide is strictly talking about trading in quantity. So for example, selling a common item such as a quantity of basic lanterns in a village of 800 people would yield a maximum interest of 32 buyers. 800 times 4 is 3,200. 3,200 times 1% is 32. The guide indicates that buying price and selling price are essentially the same. So as a lantern costs 10 gold pieces according to the Men and Magic basic equipment list, then selling 32 lanterns in a village of 800 people would yield 320 gold pieces. This trade guide is useful if player characters wish to sell to traders, as it provides a formula to help calculate how much they are willing to purchase. What confuses me, however, is that if you sell at the price you buy, then there is no profit to be made unless, of course, the items are found or recovered instead of being bought in the first place. But is the silence of the D&D books throughout the 70s on the subject of selling an indication that prices are fixed, whether buying or selling? Perhaps this is exactly it. In the medieval fantasy world, prices are set for each type of good or service, and adding interest on any kind of loan was prohibited. This doesn't seem illogical to me and gives us the perfect excuse to get on with the game instead of making mundane rules about how much a character's spare arrows can be sold for. I did some extracurricular reading on the subject of the medieval economy. According to Terry Jones in his book Medieval Lives, in England, haggling over basic commodities was illegal, and in most food markets bargaining was punishable by a fine, and holding an auction was seen as a criminal act. The law of supply and demand that insists on higher prices when goods are in short supply was regarded as anathema and therefore not allowed to operate in these medieval markets. According to Aaron J. Gurevich, in his chapter on medieval merchants from the book The Medieval World, edited by Jack Le Goff, allowable interest rates on loans was capped. In Florence, rates greater than 15 or 20% were considered usurious. Citizens of Constance could not, under municipal law, charge more than 11% on loans. Summarising a little about how this book describes the merchants class, they were scorned by the church for offering interest on a loan or buying and selling for profit. The hatred for these types of traders was enough that they would not want to freely admit their profession. Further, it was often considered heretical to give a poor person a shirt if you had two, because worldly goods were considered to be obtained in connection with a person's preordained service to God. Of course, this is all very Eurocentric, but it's clear that the implied world of OD&D is also very Eurocentric. The suggested AD&D economy does provide one or two good examples of buying, selling, and loaning for profit. The player's handbook suggests a buying price of 20% under the selling price of jewellery and gems when selling to a jeweller or gem cutter. In medieval Florence, this would not quite be considered usurious behaviour by everyone, as it is not over the considered maximum of 20%. The player's handbook also explains that bankers will give loans with an interest rate of typically 10% per month or even 5% per week. A well-known and propertied character can typically get large loans at relatively low interest, 1% per week or thereabouts. Again, this would just about cut it for medieval Florence standards. What may seem appropriate in OD&D when it comes to selling or pawning something is that a suitable trader or merchant must be sought, because any other type of worker, be it a blacksmith, grocer, carpenter or what have you, would, you might imagine, only sell their own wares, brought about by their own hands. So once a suitable merchant or trader is found, then you would buy at an 80% sale price to maximise their potential profit without risking condemnation for usurious behaviour. Negotiating the price would also potentially be illegal, so the price is the price. For those who prefer a world where price is negotiable, then there are just a few examples across the 3 brown OD&D books relating to some form of negotiation with an NPC. The famous 2d6 reaction roll, which is specified for use when meeting NPCs or monsters in the underworld. There is also the 2d6 table for random reaction by monsters, and the 3d6 loyalty check for NPCs who are providing a service to a character. These reaction rolls do seem like an appropriate way to go about handling many types of negotiation, including selling or pawning. The bell curve probability of the roll on 2d6 or 3d6 also means results will fall into an average range, with very low or very high prices being less likely, which seems more realistic than rolling a straight die. Haggling price might be a fun interaction, but in many cases might just slow down the game, keep the party away from the exciting stuff. Although in a desperate attempt to secure an item of importance when it is out of the player character's price range, they might resort to negotiating the price only to be fined and then apprehended by the authorities for not being able to pay, and this could make for some interesting gaming. So if you'd like to read a transcript of everything I just said in regards to buying, selling, pawning, then please take a look at my blog, solodungeoncrawler.blogspot.com, as I've posted up the transcript there as an article. So coming back to the game, Sister Galantia pawned her lantern. She received 8 gold pieces for it and a receipt with an offer to buy back within a month. And looking at this receipt, she can see that the handwriting was the same as the receipt for the replacement vase. So Ilara attempted to cast a charm person spell on the pawnbroker, who had to save versus spells and needed a 16 to save. Rolled a 17, which was not an easy task, but with a 17 the pawnbroker saved. She noticed Ilara's mystical chant and somatic body language, and so she resisted. She immediately called several lackeys to attention, some common thuggish looking types who for combat purposes I treated as bandits, and they were 10 in total. So this was an interesting encounter. The party won the initiative, and they wanted to alert the local constabulary to the thugs who were attempting to disturb the peace. And to handle this, I just asked the Oracle a yes-no question. Are they able to alert the local constabulary? And the answer was no, nobody heeded them. So at this point I rolled a reaction roll for the thugs who were uncertain. The pawnbroker's lackeys wanted to know why Ilara was using a charm spell on their employer. Ilara attempted to convince them that she was just trying to make the pawnbroker let her swap her lantern for a much more exotic item, admitting that she thought a little charm spell might have helped. But unfortunately, she was not a very talented magic user and has actually never successfully cast a charm person spell before, so I don't know what she was thinking. So this went back to the reaction roll, and the thugs rolled a 7 in total, so another uncertain reaction. So the bandits were not convinced that Ilara was not dangerous. We're not going to just let the party walk away for the insult. So the party needed to pay a bribe of 20 gold pieces, which they did. They handed the money over to the bandits to make things right. And how this works in a typical solo game run by me, I have some rules for uncertain reactions by monsters. Uncertain reaction rolls leave the player open to trying to influence the monster's reaction by paying a bribe or attempting to communicate. So a bribe can be offered to influence an intelligent monster's reaction roll in the form of gold pieces or equivalent value at the following ratios per total hit dice of monsters. So if they offer 200 gold pieces per monster's hit die, then they receive a +4 bonus, 100 gold pieces per hit die, a +3 bonus, 70 per hit die, +2, 40 per hit die, +1. So if the party were attempting to bribe 2 hill giants, for example, who have 8 hit dice each, 16 in total, they will, the party that is, require 1,600 gold pieces for a +3 bonus, 1,120 gold pieces for a +2 bonus, or 640 gold pieces for a +1 bonus. So after this occurred, the party wanted to send Hilda Stoneheft, because she had the highest dexterity score of the demi-humans in the party, to follow the pawnbroker after the market trading had ceased for the day, to see if she could find out where the stolen goods had been hidden. So I decided at this point it was time to bring in the thief class, which was not first introduced, but formally introduced in Greyhawk. There was an earlier thief that was introduced in a magazine called the Great Plains Game Players Newsletter. So the thief class also allows for demi-humans to gain experience as a thief. So from now on, Hilda will have some basic thief abilities and gain some bonuses to those abilities for being a dwarf. So she basically decided to follow the pawnbroker using her move silently and hide in shadow abilities to remain undiscovered. So it probably occurs to most people when looking at the OD&D thief abilities for the first time that the chance of succeeding when using any of the said abilities at first level is pretty slim. At first glance it seems quite harsh on the player. So in our case we have a first level apprentice thief who is a dwarf, so gets some bonus, attempting to follow an unlawful merchant back to their hideout to retrieve stolen goods. The thief wants to remain hidden and silent, so the relevant skills would be the ability to hide in shadows and move silently. The apprentice only has a 25% and 15% chance of being successful at these things. So the obvious issue here is that hiding at night time behind barrels of goods or wagons and carefully following the merchant from a distance is far easier than sneaking up on a guard without much cover and just a little shadow for concealment. So the system as presented is a little bit too ambiguous for my tastes. So a quick flick through my old rulebooks indicates that this ambiguity wasn't really addressed throughout the later iterations of old school D&D. Frank Menser does offer the following comments in the Rule Cyclopedia regarding move silently. The DM, at their discretion, may modify the thief's role at any time. When he tries moving silently across a field of dried leaves, his percentage chance would go down, while if he does so during a loud tournament, his chance will be greatly enhanced. Frank also offers the following advice for hiding shadows. Successful use of this special ability means that the thief moves and remains in shadows, making him very hard to see. While the thief is in shadows, observers only get a chance to see them if they look directly at the thief, at which time he must roll again. Success means that the thief remains unobserved. While in shadows, the thief may use his move silently ability, but attacking someone reveals the thief. This is all pretty much common sense and offers some clue as to how the referee might handle these special abilities, but the ambiguity remains. Most good referees might have no problem making on-the-spot rulings, but what if you were playing solo? In that case, a little more robustness is required. Looking at Frank Menser's text closely, it becomes obvious, if not already, that moving silently has every bit to do with noise, so essentially the noisier the environment, the better the chance. In regards to hiding shadows, of course, the darker it is, the better the chance. So something like the following could be helpful. If the level of noise is silent, then a 10% penalty will be imposed. If the level of noise is quiet, there'll be no penalty or bonus. Moderate would be a 20% bonus. Noisy 40% and very loud 60%. In regards to hiding shadows, if the light level is bright, there will be a 10% penalty. Dim light would be no penalty and no bonus. Dark 20%, very dark 40%, pitch black 60%. So yeah, let me know if you think I'm on the right track with this one. If you want to go over everything I've just said, looking at a transcript, then go to solodungeoncrawler.blogspot.com for the full discussion. So coming back to my game, I would argue that the level of noise between the market and wherever the pawnbroker was moving off to with her goods plus her lackeys would be relatively moderate, so I allowed a 20% bonus to the roll, which meant that Hilda had a 45% chance of success. I would also say that after market, the light will be dim, but not yet dark, so she gets no bonus to hide in shadows, so only has a 15% chance of accomplishing this feat. So instead of trying this, she was going to rely on cover via vegetation, buildings, trees, wagons and so on, and generally just try to keep a safe distance. So I asked the Oracle, was she spotted? The answer was no. Did she manage to keep quiet enough with her move silently ability? And I rolled the percentile against her ability with the relevant bonuses, and the answer was yes. So Hilda successfully discovered the pawnbroker's lair and reported back to the rest of the party immediately. So to work out what kind of lair this was, I referred to the Judges Guild ready reference sheets, which have a fantastic section on randomly generating details for a monster's lair. And in this case, the lair will be a single-story manor house with 6 rooms, 600 square feet with a single tower, so it makes absolute sense that the pawnbroker went to the manor house in Greenford. So at this point in the adventure, the party wanted to scope out the manor house and see if they could discover whether the landed lord was a decent one or whether they were knowingly receiving stolen goods. First, they needed to gain an audience with this lord. The lord was a necromancer, so I went down a massive rabbit hole with this. The Judges Guild Ready Reference Sheet does have what's called a social rank, and this social rank is very dependent on what the character's sort of background or profession is. So I kind of took this concept and played around with it and came up with some simple rules for a social hierarchy. So I used rational logic to create a way of randomly determining a basic social structure in a solo campaign that is abstract and works well with OD&D. So the highest rank would be rulers, and I put these into 3 categories. There's military rulers, religious rulers, and magical rulers. And military rulers can be either lords or superheroes. Religious rulers are patriarchs, and magical rulers are wizards and necromancers. And these titles represent the different character level titles in an OD&D campaign. And essentially, depending on the type of setting, these categories can just remain basic and can essentially be reskinned depending on what the context of the campaign is. So essentially, a lord could be replaced with a king or an emperor. Next, we have a constabulary, which can either have a military leader or a religious leader, and the leader would, if military, be a hero, if religious, be a bishop. And then down in the ranks for military, below hero, you have swashbuckler, myrmidon, champion. On the religious side, it's either the bishop at the top, and the rank underneath would always be lama. And then you have the military elites, which are veterans, warriors, and swordsmen, and the religious elites, which are acolytes, adepts, village priests, vicars, curates. Then you have the actual constables, and on the military side, these will be men-at-arms, and on the religious side, these will be dervishes. And then literally everything else I just shoved into a giant table, and every social rank has an associated number. The higher the rank, the more important the individual. And this was mostly based on the upkeep costs of the individual character type according to their level, or the wages of the NPC in question. And the reason this is important is because if you want to gain an audience with an important NPC, then you need to follow some rules. So to find out whether an audience can be gained with an individual of a higher social rank, simply subtract the social rank of the character wanting to gain an audience from the social rank of the character whose audience is being sought with. And the result is the target number on a percentile die, which then needs to be matched or beaten in order to successfully gain an audience. So through random determination, the Lord is a necromancer and is at social level 60. Ilara has the highest social rank of the whole party, but it's only 18, so she needs a 42 or higher on a percentile die, and she rolled a 83. So she succeeded in successfully gaining an audience with the necromancer. So the questing knights met formally with the lord of the manor in the hall of the manor house. The lord is a necromancer and therefore a much more achieved magic user than Ilara is currently. So the party naturally wanted to scope out what kind of person this necromancer was before they started asking uncomfortable questions. And they want to try to uncover the Lord's alignment through open conversation. So I rolled the alignment randomly. The Lord seemed lawful. So Alara will do the talking. So again, we're going to the oracle here to answer the questions that Alara has. So, what is your relationship with the pawnbroker? And the answer on the oracle was open individual. So this was my interpretation. I allow him to come and go as he pleases. And why is that? Harm path. Because if I do not, then he has threatened me harm. But you're a powerful necromancer. How can a simple pawnbroker harm you? So the answer the oracle gave here was heal suffering. He managed to get his hands on my spell books, and is withholding them until he has finished his business here. Furthermore, I have a curse upon me which only the right spell can remove. So I am forced to cooperate for now until my books are returned. What is the nature of the curse? So for this I just rolled a 20-sided die, re-rolling anything that was 13 or higher against the diseases listed in Blackmore. I rolled an 8, which was typhoid fever. So I ruled that in this instance, as the disease is a curse, it is not contagious. So is the pawnbroker still in the manor house? Was the next question I asked. And I gave this a 50-50 in terms of odds. And the answer was no. So the necromancer said, she will be in the market. So the party then asked the Lord for permission to defeat the pawnbroker and lackeys with force and retrieve the spellbooks and stolen goods. But they also wanted some men-at-arms to aid them in the confrontation. So I ruled that Alara must handle this negotiation because she is the one who has formally gained the audience. I decided that she would get a +3 bonus because both characters are of the same race. However, she wouldn't gain any bonus for charisma, as her charisma is only average, and she is of neutral alignment, not lawful like the Lord, so no bonus there either. So she had a +3 altogether. On the 2d6 she rolled a 9, which was a positive reaction. So the pawnbroker was happy enough to allow the questing knights to take matters into their own hands and offered 1 to 6 men-at-arms for support. So I rolled a 3 and I ruled that these constables were heavy foot figures. So I'll probably cover this in more detail later, but in terms of the actual encounter, I decided to use the additions to the alternative combat system, which were provided in Eldritch Wizardry. That supplement introduced a adjusted dexterity rating. So essentially in an encounter where the movement is being done simultaneously, any characters who want to use missile fire or cast spells are subject to an adjusted dexterity score. And the way that works is the basic dexterity score of the combatant is taken and it's adjusted for things like being surprised, having weapons ready, spells ready, what level of spell is being cast, whether they're wearing heavy or lighter armour, whether they have a shield, what rank they're in the formation, what their encumbrance is, all these kinds of things. You compute the adjusted dexterity, and basically whoever has the highest adjusted dexterity will get to act first, and that will go down the line until it gets to the combatant who has the lowest dexterity rating, who will go last. Now, I've always been a little bit put off trying this system out because it seems quite complex, overly complex, and just a little bit kind of tricky to implement. having kind of looked at it in a little bit more detail, it became apparent that a lot of the things that the dexterity is adjusted for will be fixed. For example, armor, shield will remain relatively the same. Where the character is in the formation will remain relatively the same. If a character's an elf and they get a bonus for their race, then again, they're not going to suddenly change into a human if they're an elf. And if they're holding their weapon in their hand, then it could be considered always ready. So a lot of these things don't change. So it's essentially looking at what the character is attempting to do and then looking to see if there's any extra situational modifiers, and then computing just those. So I gave it a try and I quite liked it, but I think the way that I'll probably implement it is, I'll make the initiative roll at the start of combat, and if the rolls are tied, then I would take Gary's personal house rule, where he would use a simultaneous movement turn order if the initiative is tied, and in that case I would use adjusted dexterity to work out who gets to fire missiles or cast spells first. But in most cases I wouldn't use it. With simultaneous movement, I tend to write some written orders for the party to establish what they're doing before the actual action takes place. So in this case, Ilara, Maud and Ascalante, who are the 3 magic users, will all cast Sleep, and the rest of the party will simply just move into melee. So that was the written order. So looking at the magic users, Ilara, Maud and Ascalante. Ilara has a 14 dexterity, Maud has a 10 dexterity and Ascalante has a 17 dexterity. As they are all casting a first level spell, they get a +1 bonus to the adjusted dexterity, and they can all be considered to be in the second rank or further back because they are the magic users. They don't take the front line, so they will receive a -2 to their adjusted dexterity for that. Now, one huge hole in all this is monsters do not have dexterity ratings listed in Monsters and Treasure. In the original copy of Keep on the Borderlands, Gary Gygax did provide some monster dexterity ratings, so there's a clue there. And where there is no listed rating, one option is to do what Dr. Eric Holmes recommends in Holmes Basic. Just roll 3d6 to determine what the monster's dexterity rating is in that particular instance. And this particular combat was over very quickly because all 3 magic users had a higher dexterity rating than the bandits, so they were able to cast a spell before the bandits could do anything. The spell did not affect all of the bandits, but the ones who didn't fall asleep were subject to a morale check, which they failed, so the bandits essentially became subdued, and the fight was over before it had even begun. So to wrap up, with the bandits subdued, the pawnbroker also surrendered. Sister Galantia took back the lantern she had pawned. The party went to take the bandits and pawnbrokers as prisoners, and they basically decided to sell these bandits on the open market for profit. So again, a transcript of this discussion that I'm about to impart is available at solodungeoncrawler.blogspot.com. I basically decided to sit down with my OD&D books and have a read through to see if I could find something that might indicate what should happen with subdued creatures. And whilst flicking through Volume 1, Men and Magic, I noticed the following text in this section regarding non-player characters. Capture of non-player monsters. Morale dice can cause a man or intelligent monster to attempt to surrender or become subdued. When this happens, an offer of service can be made, assuming that communication is possible. As outlined above, subdued monsters will obey for a time without need to check their reactions, and such monsters are saleable. See Book 2. So, as treasure is such an important thing in OD&D, I felt that selling these subdued bandits would be an obvious choice. I searched high and low in Volume 2, Monsters and Treasure, to find more information on doing this, and almost gave up, deciding that the reference, such monsters are saleable, see Book 2, was some kind of mistake. Then I noticed the following text under the entry for dragons. Value of subdued dragons. Subdued dragons can be sold on the open market, going out of existence in the game, for from 500 to 1,000 gold pieces per hit point it can take. Offers are determined by the referee, merely by rolling a 6-sided die to see if the offer will be 500 die 1, 600 die 2, etc. gold pieces. Of course, the character or characters who subdued the dragon could keep it in their own service or sell it to other players for whatever they could get. For lack of any other information, it would seem sensible that any monster subdued for sale on the open market would go for from 500 to 1,000 gold pieces per hit point it can take. The text also explains length of subdual. A subdued dragon will remain in that state until such a time as an opportunity presents itself to escape or kill its master. But as long as the master is in a commanding position, it will not attempt either course. This mechanic might tie in well with the prisoner rules in Chainmail, which explains a guard of 1 person per 5 prisoners must be maintained at all times, or prisoners escape. Escaped prisoners may fight normally on the turn following escape. And thus we have some simple rules for selling prisoners in OD&D. Now, there are some implications or controversy in regards to these rules, and the best way to summarise this is I'm going to read a comment that I received on my blog, and it basically says, I must disagree with this post. I've been following your blog and channel. I enjoy the solo D&D and can understand the relationship between this post and the solo roleplay episode. I must protest though that this post and what it is really about in your game would be selling other humans. Slavery. This brings about a big question in the game. Does the town, maybe kingdom, allow slavery or not? If so, what kind of slavery? Selling of people or just unintelligent beasts? I've rarely played in a world or scenario where slavery wasn't considered an evil act, so finding some unhatched lizard folk eggs might have a buyer, but humans probably won't. And I think that there's some really good points made there, and there are indeed other ways to think about what selling of subdued humans really entails. And I guess you have game mechanics and you have the flavour that is sprinkled on top. So one alternative to consider is that you cannot sell intelligent creatures on the market. Another interpretation could be that, as these are bandits, what essentially is happening when they become subdued, taken prisoner and sold is that they are essentially delivered to the local constabulary and a bounty is paid to the characters for bringing known criminals to justice. And some other limitations could be imposed on this, that the prisoners in question must be inherently evil or chaotic, neither neutral or lawful. So that's one way to look at this particular area of discussion. So if you want to let me know what you think and want to enter the discussion, then feel free to visit my blog and have a look in the comments section and add your thoughts there, or let me know in the comments under this video. So in my game, the bandits were brought to justice and a 600 gold piece bounty was paid per bandit. plus the pawnbroker as well. So that was 6,600 gold pieces in total. And Greenford is now free of this mercantile menace. So last few questions for the Oracle were, does the pawnbroker have a wagon? I felt that was very likely. So the answer was yes. And it was stocked with treasure type A, which was only, unfortunately, 4,000 copper pieces in this instance. So despite their criminal activities, it appeared that they did not have a good day of trade, but at least the party can now use the wagon to transport the gold back home. So the party returned the stolen goods to the peddler, which were somewhat scant, and as a reward they received 200 silver pieces and 50 gold pieces. So to calculate the rewards given by NPCs, what I normally do is I have a table. Down the left column is the NPC's hit dice, and across the top is the amount of silver, gold, gems, jewellery and magic items that they might be given by the NPC. And the way this table works is it's basically based on the random treasure table given in Underworld and Wilderness Adventures for stocking dungeon rooms with treasure, but instead of it going on the level of the dungeon, it goes on the level of the NPC. So I felt like this was a reasonably elegant way of dealing with such matters. So the party also returned the Lord Necromancer's spellbooks back, and as a reward they received 8,000 silver pieces, 4 pieces of jewellery worth 8,000 gold pieces each. So that was a pretty good prize considering. And then I asked the Oracle, and this was the last question I asked the Oracle: was the wagon pulled by draft horses or mules? The answer was yes. The wagon was pulled by 4 draft horses, so can carry up to 18,000 encumbrance. The encumbrance of the treasure is 8,330. So the party were forced to sell their raft as they could not take it with them, and they got 32 gold pieces for it. I calculated selling prices at 80% of the buying price, and I didn't allow negotiation on the prices as I discussed earlier. So this is based on the generic European medieval economy where prices are fixed, negotiation is condemned, and so is charging more than 20% interest, as this would be seen as usurious behaviour. So the party took their gold to the construction site that they currently have going on of their wooden stronghold, and they had the engineer extend the work to include a stone cellar below the wooden keep, which is basically a wooden building with 2 stories, a cellar and attic. To excavate the space for the cellar will cost 720 gold pieces and will take 24 days. The cost of the cellar and the stairs leading down to it will cost 2,130 gold pieces, and this will take 4 months. So including the current work, the stronghold will take over 10 months to build. And this includes a 30 by 40 foot wooden building with 2 stories and an attic, surrounded by a circular palisade about 80 feet wide and a 2.5 foot catwalk for defence. A set of stone stairs leading to a stone cellar beneath the keep. The additional wages to the engineer will be 3,750 gold pieces, so the total expenditure will be 5,880. So after the party stop off at the construction site, the questing knights return with their wagon to the last redoubt. It is at time of session playing the 30th of March 2024, and that was where that particular adventure ends. So you can see that I'm going back here to March in terms of recounting what happened during my campaign. So I have quite a lot of catching up to do over the coming episodes, and this particular one took quite a while. I had quite a lot to discuss, but as time goes by, I think because I've handled at least some of the main topics that I need to handle in order to make you understand how I approach solo gaming, so as these session reports go by, they might become a little bit more streamlined in the information I have to part in order to explain what's going on and why. But either way, I thank you for your patience, for hearing me out, listening to what I have to say in terms of original Dungeons and Dragons and solo tabletop role playing. So I'm gonna leave it there for the time being and pick up again with another episode in due course. So thanks for listening. I hope you found some value in this episode. Have a great week, and I will see you in the next session.